We are the Brothers Mahoney. I am Michael.
And I am James.
And today we are discussing episode 3 of the revival series of Doctor Who, The Unquiet Dead. The Unquiet Dead was written by Mark Gatiss and aired April 2005. The plot being that the Doctor and Rose are joined by Charles Dickens to investigate a mysterious plague of zombies in Cardiff, 1869. I feel like quite often this one's overlooked compared to a lot of other episodes in Series 1 of the revival, and I sort of understand it, but at the same time I generally find it a decent episode.
Yeah, it's never been one of my favorites of the season. I mean, it's always done its job well, but never much more than that. It's not that I think they waste Charles Dickens' character. It's just there's not really too much for him to do, honestly.
Yeah, actually,
He's a great actor, but I mean, there's just not much for him to do in this. I realize he kind of saves the day, but it still really doesn't feel like it's enough to justify him being here.
It seems that a lot of what Charles Dickens does is deny the events going on around him, often thinking it's some type of trick, or more amusingly, some type of phantasmagoria.
That's true, because the writer of this story, Mark Gatiss, also wrote the Big Finish story Phantasmagoria, which we have previously had a short discussion about.
Yeah, I have to imagine it's a nice little in reference, and plus Phantasmagoria sounds like the type of language that Charles Dickens would be using anyway.
Well, plus it's also accurate because the Phantasmagoria was literally a type of theater back in the old days that used lights and shadows to tell horror stories.
Those sound like the days. Yeah, but Charles Dickens doesn't really have that much to do until the end, because up until that point, he's just sort of confused by what's going on. He's not really involved in a lot of the events. I still think it's fine, because not every episode that has an historical figure needs to be focused around the historical figure. It's sort of nice just to have him as a side character. Like James said, the actor is pretty good, but it's just sort of strange that he did have a little more to do. But honestly, that doesn't bother me that much.
Yeah, this episode just has a strange feeling. It might be because it's just when the series is getting started again, but I always had a strange feeling to me. One, besides Rose and the Doctor, there are just three other characters in this story besides the alien species we meet. But there's only three characters, being an undertaker of some dubious morals, his assistant, well, by assistant I mean servant, basically, and Charles Dickens. I suppose we see, when we first meet Charles Dickens, he's talking to this one guy, and, he's just laying out his troubles. And that's actually a very touching scene, the way that Charles is portrayed there. And I guess that character, he existed, but beyond that, there really isn't much. I suppose there's the guy you meet at the very beginning of the episode whose grandmother has just died. But I mean, he's dispatched very shortly in the episode. So I do think, by the way, that the way the cold open ends is very well done.
Yeah, and of course, let's not forget Charles Dickens' carriage driver.
Yes, I did forget him actually, but I mean, that's just the use for him.
Yeah, point being, there's not that many important characters here. Now, the lucky thing is, all three of the important characters, I think, all had pretty good performances. Charles Dickens is played by Simon Callow,
who later, funnily enough, comes back in the Warden of River Song 5 seasons later.
Yeah, so if you're still with us in 8 years, we might mention him again. But yeah, Simon Callow, he, like I said, Dickens doesn't have that much to do in the story aside from the end, but I still think it's a pretty good performance, and he has some good emotional material to work with. The Undertaker is played by Alan David, and I don't know the actor. To be fair, I don't know Simon Callow, but I thought he gave a pretty good performance too. And perhaps maybe most striking is Eve Myers, who played Gwyneth.
Yeah, if you've ever watched Torchwood, you've seen this actress. She, of course, becomes one of the main stars, the point of view character, in fact, for the Torchwood series. And this is the first time we get to see her on screen. Apparently, she impressed somebody enough that they decided to bring her back when they started Torchwood up. And it's just a really interesting scene. I mean, we see this with Doctor Who a lot, actually. We saw Peter Capaldi before he became the Doctor in Doctor Who, and actually in Torchwood, now that I think about it. We saw Karen Gillian in The Fires of Pompeii before she became Amy a season later. So Doctor Who actually does this a fair amount in the Revival series. So it's just really interesting to see Eve portray a character from the 18th century who doesn't quite act at all like how Gwan does when we get to know her throughout Torchwood.
Yeah, and that's one of the another strong parts of the episode, in my opinion. We have Rose. Of course, Rose just got through the somewhat trying experience in the end of the world where she felt quite disconnected from all the alien life forms around her. And she did make one small connection with a alien plumber, but aside from that, she felt pretty out of it.
Well, yeah, it may have been trying for her, but imagine her being in the position of Ian and Barbara.
That is true. She did choose what she didn't know of and not choosing what she never could know.
You could say that I guess makes some sense. So Rose just, has went through the experience with the Bitchy trampoline, and now she gets to enjoy her first time in the past on Earth. And she, until the events happen, is quite enjoying it, actually.
Yeah, and what stands out is a conversation she had with Gwyneth, because both of them are young women. Rose is a bit more, well, as Gwyneth says, she speaks like some type of wild thing.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that would probably be true of anybody Gwyneth would meet who happened to live 100 years in the future.
But yeah, so they have a conversation. I think they're trying to find common ground. I mean, they're both, pretty good characters. Gwyneth, Rose asks if Gwyneth went to school with just sort of rich coming from Rose who didn't finish A levels or even go to A levels, but hey, we're not judging her. And Gwyneth is like, oh, of course, miss. Every Sunday. And just the expression on Rose's face sort of cracks me up.
Yeah, Rose just has a bit of a culture shock at this situation. She had one in the last episode in the end of the world, and she certainly has one here. Yes, of course, to her, she went to school, I would assume, every day of the week. She didn't go to school just on Sundays. And we find out during the course of this conversation with Rose that Gwyneth happens to be a bit of a psychic. She can't really control her powers too great, but she knows she has them, and she doesn't talk about them really to anybody, because who can she talk to about them? But she sees in Rose's mind the place she comes from, a London with shameful women half naked. And another thing she sees in her mind is something about the big bad wolf. And we might or we might not see that come up in the future. Here's a hint, we do.
Yeah, it's just one of the things. Big bad wolf. Maybe Rose went to a zoo once and it's just one scary wolf, but that also might not be it.
Yeah, that's most certainly not it.
Although that I could actually understand. But yeah, Gwyneth has some mild psychic abilities, which also plays a part in the plot. These zombies that we mentioned before are being controlled by this gaseous alien life form that sort of take a dead body as sort of a husk, and then they control it. And the doctor wants to hold a seance to try to get in touch with this alien life form. And luckily, since Gwyneth has some mild psychic abilities, they're able to do that. And they find out that they are dealing with a species called the Gauth.
The Gauth apparently, according to them, used to have physical form, but the Gauth lost their physical bodies in the Time War, which of course pulls on the heartstrings of the Ninth Doctor, who has just been so ripped up about that war.
And it's worth mentioning, going back to Rose, the first episode of this season, that when he's confronted by the Nastine consciousness, the Doctor says that he was unable to save pretty much any planet. So the fact that he's run into a species that's in this condition, partially because of his inability to save everyone. It's not his responsibility, but of course the Doctor feels it is. So they come to a somewhat interesting part where there's not that many Gauth left, according to the Gauth. In fact, the Gauth says, pity the Gauth.
Yeah, they have a very meek and mild voice, where they're just, not quite wailing, but they're just saying, pity the Gauth, help us, save us. It's basically what it comes down to.
And the Doctor, of course, wants to do so, which leads to some of the amusing scene. More, I say amusing in episodes that's somewhat serious, but the Gauth can survive with the human corpses, and the Doctor's willing to allow the Garth, there's not that many, allow the Garth to come through a portal, because Cardiff on the side notes in the portal, Torchwood, Watches, you know this, but you wouldn't know listen to us because we just brought it up. So bringing the Garth through the portal so they can possess the bodies. And the doctor's out for it. In doctor's opinion, hey, these people have lived and now they're dead, so you might as well let the bodies be used if if the Garth can use them. Rose is, of course, coming from a time where that's maybe not the opinion she holds.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair to the doctor, not that we need to be fair to him because I think he's morally right in this situation, but I mean, he did say it was going to be just a temporary measure because his idea was to get the Garth to another planet they could inhabit.
Rose objects to the plan, even aside from the fact that they would have to use Gwyneth to make it work. She's objecting to the plan, just not her thing.
Well, I mean, on a moral level, I mean, she's morally offended by the idea of the Garth using bodies like this.
And one possible reason she might be so strongly against it is because early in the episode, it did mention during her conversation with Gwyneth that she lost her father when she was young.
That is true, it did mention that. And so that could have been on the forefront of her mind. Now, of course, this was happening in the 1800s, so it would have been, her father's body that was being used. But she could have been using that as a touchstone to be why she was so offended by the idea. Although, of course, the doctor basically brushes any objection like that aside, saying that she has to get used to a different set of morality if she's going to be traveling with him.
Gwyneth, though, comes from a background of religious instruction, and she sort of sees the Garth not as an alien life form, but she refers to them as angels. With that framework in mind, she wants to, of course, help the angels. It will not be the first time religion has allowed someone to do something maybe somewhat foolish, but she helps the Garth, and the Garth may not have been quite as honest as they previously appeared. Things don't go quite as planned, and the Doctor finds himself on Rose, and along with Charles Dickens, faced with what appears to be death.
Oh, death. But also what looks like basically an invasion. Because the Garth not only can take over dead bodies, one, there's a lot more Garth than what was implied, and furthermore, they just start killing. For example, the Mortician.
Yeah, if you like that character, don't expect him to survive.
Yeah, he gets killed and his body immediately gets taken over by one of the Garth. So not only are they going to use bodies of those who just, get deceased naturally, they're going to just start killing people to take over more bodies. And as there's more Garth than what was anticipated, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, and Rose finds this somewhat difficult to understand, because in her mind, with her logic, she hasn't even been born yet, so she can't die.
Yeah, but of course time can be rewritten, which is most times apparently can be rewritten. And I don't even find this a very hard concept to grasp, honestly. But apparently Rose did. But the doctor had to explain to her that you can be born in the 20th century and die in the 19th. That's just possible with time travel. Which again, that makes sense to me on just a normal basis.
Yeah, see, the doctor doesn't really care though about Rose dying. He's scared about his own death, which I find sort of interesting.
Yeah, I suspect that it's perhaps possible that if the doctor was killed and then his body was taken over by a Garth, that would interrupt the regeneration process. So I could see that being the reason why he's so unnaturally panicky. More panicky than we would usually see the doctor during the situation at the end of this episode.
And even if he did regenerate, he might still be possessed by the Garth, so it might not help him much.
Well, see, that would be more interesting. Maybe there could be a Garth doctor. Don't let Big Finish get that idea.
Yeah, that is always a possibility for a new series of Big Finish releases. As always, we like to try to set these stories in sort of a personal time frame for each doctor with the useful help of the TARDIS Wiki.
Yeah, the TARDIS Wiki is invaluable for any fan of Doctor Who, and we've been using it a lot lately once we've gotten back into Doctor Who after a bit of a hiatus due to being burnt out during an era neither of us particularly enjoyed. And also since we're getting into Big Finish for the first time, it's also been a useful source for that as well.
And I've also spent over hundreds of dollars on books, so that's always useful too.
Yes, also the books, which we also are getting into also as well. But yeah, so TARDIS Wiki is just a great source. So I like to place the stories that we talk about just in personal timelines for each Doctor, according to what the TARDIS wiki has on the 30 timeline pages for them. And this is pretty simple. This one takes place directly after the end of the world, which was the last episode of the show, and right after it comes Aliens Have Landed, World War III, which is the next 2 episodes. There are 2 short stories, though, that are placed on this timeline between The Unquiet Dead and Aliens Have Landed. Those being a short story that was published in the 2006 Doctor Who annual, of course with Christopher Eccleston and Rose, as it would be, and a short story published in the collection book, The Days He Saved the Doctor, 4 Stories from the TARDIS, which came out in 2018, which has 4 stories of 4 different female companions saving the Doctor. And in this short story, Rose apparently stands tall. Now, there's no synopsis for this story on the TARDIS wiki, but I assume that she did her best.
Yeah, and in this story, Rose isn't quite as much as the focal point that she was in the previous episode, but I think she still has some really solid scenes, especially those with Gwyneth's character.
Honestly, this episode, it's, as Michael said earlier, is one of the more forgettable ones, and it's easy to see why. Because when you compare it to things like even The End of the World, which was more maudlin, it had great characterization, but the actual plot was a bit maudlin. Although the thing is, it still stands out because of the special effects for that episode. When you compare it to things like Dalek, I mean, no one's going to remember The Unquiet Dead. No one's going to remember it if you compare it to even like The Long Game, which has always been a personal favorite of mine. I do really like The Long Game. And even Boomtown has, again, not the best backbone of a story, but has amazing characterization. So with all of those stories, this really does just fall under the radar.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine. I personally enjoyed. I think it's probably not. Let me phrase. It's not as good as The End of the World, but honestly, on par with Rose, I can buy it.
I think I'd place Rose above it personally, but that's also because I like the Outhands. Now, the Gouth are, I quite enjoyed the Gouth. I wouldn't mind seeing them come back. Maybe they have somewhere. I quite enjoy them, but I do like the Outhands more just because they have the classic feel, since they are a classic Who villain.
Yeah, I just think Rose has maybe a few more awkward scenes.
No, Rose is very awkward. There's a lot of very strange things happening in Rose, mostly to do with the Outhand Mickey.
Yeah, so I think this episode's pretty decent. Again, I think the first season as a whole, they were still trying to figure out exactly where they're going, but I thought it worked out decently well.
Yeah, they were trying to find their groove, and they eventually, Rhapsody Davis was eventually able to find it. I think he was able to start really finding it during series 3.
Yeah, personally, I think this is a decent episode. It's nothing great, but I have a good time watching it again.
Yeah, it's not an exceptional episode in my opinion, but it's a perfectly fine way to pass the time. It's nowhere near some of the stuff we see that isn't as good in later seasons, such as perhaps Sleep No More or Fear Her, which comes the very next season, which I actually like more than a lot of people do, but I still don't think it's a great episode. It's entertaining though.
Yeah, but I mean, this one, I think it's fair to say I might enjoy it a little more than James does. I don't think it's even fair to call this one a bad episode. I think it's perfectly good.
I never said it's a bad episode. It's just it's like compared to everything else in the season, it is maudlin and it is forgettable. But nothing about that makes it a bad episode. It's just has a lot of strong contenders.
Yeah, it's a strong season. It's amazing. So, a lot of people might forget or maybe overlook their first season just because there's no David Tennant.
Yeah, Christopher Eccleston only lasted 1 season. That's going to be why.
Which is a shame because I think the season has a lot to offer. Where even one of the maybe more forgettable episodes of the season, being this one, isn't bad. So if you've not seen the Revival series, well, this is the video for you since we spoiled a lot. So don't listen to it. So if you're hearing this, it's too late. But tell your friends, tell your neighbors, watch the first season.
Yeah, I know some people, when watching the Revival series, I have seen people ask before, hey, is it okay to just skip season 1 and just go straight to season 2? I mean, no, I'm not the person who asks that because my answer would always, in every situation, be no. But I'm also the person who watched the classic series from an unearthly child to survival in order. Now, I did skip the ones that were only out on the audio that haven't been animated, but, I still, spend the time and, watch the classic series in order. Now, I've only done that once. I'll probably never do it again, maybe sometime in the far future, but I just think it behooves one to watch a series in the order it's released. And I don't see why anybody would skip season 1 when there's so much important stuff that happens in season 1 that comes up later in the rest of the series.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like a big David Tennant fan and you only want to watch David Tennant Doctor Who, I mean, more power to you. It's somewhat restrictive. I mean, you can always search out the Big Finish David Tennant releases or maybe pick up some of the David Tennant Doctor Who books. But if you have an interest in the story beyond the actor portraying the Doctor, there's so much content out there that it might almost be, not quite, but it might be close to impossible to consume all of it.
Yeah, I think it is pretty close to impossible. You definitely spend a lot of time and a lot of money to be able to consume all of the Doctor Who media out there.
And I think there's so much out there that restricting yourself to maybe one era or one period. I mean, if it works,
it does you a disservice, honestly.
We think it might do someone a disservice, but if somebody wants to do that, more power to them. Hey, but we're not here to gatekeep, we're just here to have fun. What do we have coming up next, James?
Next we'll be discussing the very first Third Doctor story from 1970, Spirit from Space, which answers the very first Doctor Who story that was aired in color, which they make very good effect of with the theme song that we get to enjoy in that one.
Indeed, and that should be fun to get to. As always, this has been Michael.
And I'm James.
We're the Brothers Mahoney.